Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to this week's episode. I'm so excited that we are going to be talking about self-care. And I know for some people that's like, oh, not another thing to do, but I love this topic because it's so important. And I have an awesome guest here to chat with us about self-care, Bri. And Bri, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the work that you do just to kind of kick us off, and then we'll get into all the good stuff.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. So my name is Bri or Brianna, whichever one you want to call me. I have been a holistic health and life coach for the last nearly 8 years now, and it's transformed what I do, who I help. But at the end of the day, it's always been women. And I think just calling it what it is, like I help women prioritize their health and self-care. And because I just think, especially now I help moms. I focus on moms now because I am a mom, and I realize that it's just a lot harder. It's just harder when you have these little human beings or even grown human beings running around. You have so many things to do with them. You're working, you have all these, responsibilities, and it's just so easy for us as women and moms to care for others. And it's sometimes like we're just waiting for people to give us permission to care for ourselves sometimes, but we just need to learn it's just as important, if not more important, so we can be our best version of ourselves. So I primarily help women through one-on-one coaching, just really getting clear on what is self-care for them, what are their health goals, what are their life goals, and what are simple things you can do to move towards that and move backwards. So I think a lot of us think big picture, like we were just talking about running a half marathon, right?
Yes.
And you're not going to get up today and run tomorrow a half marathon, but if you have this bigger goal, so what do you need to be doing today, tomorrow, 3 months to like move towards that? And it's effective. We all know that works, and we tell our kids to do that too. But I think sometimes in our mind, if we're not doing 100%, whatever that 100% for us is, we're like all or nothing, like not going to do it at all. And so just helping moms and women get to the point where they think, okay, let's do this in small, simple steps. And I've had to do that, guys. Like I have a 3 and 1 year old, and
the thick of the toddler years.
I know, right? And I'm just like, I can't work out. And it's like, no, I started with like a 10-minute thing. Just move 10 minutes, start there, and then move another 10 minutes another day. And then like, eventually I'm like, oh, wow, I'm doing push-ups like how I normally did. Like, when did that happen? I didn't just suddenly get strong, it's just like, so, yeah, so that's just my heart, is to help women and moms realize that they are worthy of self-care, whatever that is, and to not feel guilty about it, but also to make it a priority for themselves.
And that has to be like, excuse me, that has to be with reality in mind. Like I'm just thinking about, we were talking about running before we started recording this episode. And, my ability to train for something before kids was totally different, right? It was just like social life, work, that I'm adapting my training schedule around. And now, there's so many different factors and so many different ways it can be derailed. And so I think when we think about how do we nurture ourselves, that context of I am a parent and I have to nurture myself in a way that works as a parent, not just this abstract, like, I don't know, big picture, like, oh, we'd love it if this is what my self-care looked like. And it's like, well, is that realistic?
Right.
But you mentioned, I think is a great place to start or continue or direct is like, what is self-care? Like, what does that even mean as a parent? So I know I have my thoughts for me personally, but tell me about your thoughts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we've seen this wave of people in society, social media talking about self-care. And I think it's a call to action of like, all right, we need to prioritize our own well-being, like whatever that is. And I think for someone to be well and healthy, it's not just physical health. It can be, it might start there, but it also may be their finances. Like if your finances are in a great place, that's going to stress your mind, stress your body, stress your relationships. But then also, so I think I like to look at it in like 7 areas of like, really, and I don't think you need to start in all 7. So just hear me when I say like start small. And so for some women, it is that physical health piece, that drinking the water, nutrition, exercise, stress management, sleep. But for some women, it may be like, listen, my finances are just like all over. I need a financial advisor. I need a bookkeeper. I need a budgeting app, like whatever it may be to help you feel grounded and well, so that you can accomplish the things you dream of or want to do in your life, whether it's traveling, sending your kids to a certain school, or getting a massage weekly. That's some women's version of self-care, right? So I think
massages are the best.
Right, exactly. If I had a professional massages, I would just be like, come here, just massage me every week and I'll be good. And so I think it's looking at what does it mean for me to take care of myself and be healthy, well, vibrant, joyful in my physical health, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, relational, and then like career, vocational, and looking at those areas. And one thing I like to do is really help people say, like, where am I feeling nourished and where am I feeling malnourished in those areas?
Oh, I love
If
that.
I'm feeling very nourished in my like relationships, it's not that you want to stop nourishing. You want to actually just figure out how can I even feel more fulfillment and nourishment there. And, or maybe you it's very clear at some points you're like, I am feeling very malnourished. Sometimes for moms in my relationships, because I'm just, especially if you're home with your young kids, like I love my kids, but they cannot have an adult conversation with me, or they can handle my feelings. Mommy's not allowed to cry, whatever. And so it's just looking at that. And when you look at that, take an inventory, take stock, you're able to be like, okay, where's my next step? What's the next right step? Because I think sometimes we're like, I need to do all this, but no, what's the next right step? And so I really advise people to look at least 2 areas to start. One area that you're like, I need some more support, like I'm struggling, or one area I'm like, I'm doing well in, but how can I improve? And just commit to that however long you need to commit to it, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And then once it's solid, then you add something else. Right? And so, so I think it differs for every person, but I think the question is, where do I need to feel more nourished in my life for me to feel fulfilled, well, and whole? And start there.
I love that. And I love the idea of 7 different areas, just because like I talk a lot about self-care with my clients and things like that, but that's so much more nuanced. It gives you like discrete, I don't know, lenses or ways of looking at your life and the different things that could be impacting you,
right,
beyond just like physical and emotional. Right?
Yes, exactly
gives you more areas. And I don't know, I feel like when we look at things differently, it opens up more like, oh, actually this would be a better place for me to start than something else over here,
right, removing those of like, I need to start here versus like, no, this is where I need to start, versus where I feel like those expectations from other people or the world are like unsaid things that it's like, no, like I need to start here and this is my version and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like not looking at other people's priorities sometimes can be helpful. Like for me, I'm a runner, like we were talking about before. And before I got pregnant with my oldest, had run several full marathons. And so heading into my postpartum with my oldest, I was like, I need to find a way that I can run, because I knew that was going to be important to my mental wellness. It wasn't even necessarily the physical wellness, like just mentally and keeping that piece of my identity. So like I signed up for a marathon when I was pregnant, when my oldest was going to be 8 months. Which is not something that most people would advise doing, right? It was fine for me. Like I was very smart about it. I was very careful. I would have dropped out if I hadn't been physically able to train for it. But I'd come off 2 marathons and I was like, this is what I want to do. I want something on the books to kind of hold me accountable and to work towards. And that wouldn't be smart for everybody. And like after my daughter was born, like that's not where I was physically. That's not where I was emotionally. That wasn't my priority. And it really shifted. And so I just feel like checking in with yourself and not like you looking at other people's priorities, that there's a lot of complexity that goes into like what's the most important thing to help you kind of feel well, and then build systems around that. I don't know.
Right. And I love how you talked about it even changed with being not just going from not being a mom to a mom, but it changed with another kid. It changed with a different, and I think that's part of it. It's allowing ourselves the grace and the freedom to change, So the win for you is still running or moving.
Yep.
How that looks, it may be different now that you have two kids, right? And so even for me, it's like what I did with one kid is very different than what I do. Well, it's similar exercises, similar movements, but how it looks is so different because it's just, I don't, it's funny. I don't want to do what I used to do. Like I have no desire to work out for a whole hour doing CrossFit like how I used to do. None at all. I love it, but I just like, if I have some space, I don't want to be doing that. I want to be sitting, not moving, not having, not having my brain. And so even like for me, a lot of the mental, physical stress of some exercises, which is good. I'm like in this season with two young kids, I'm like, I need to remove all of that. Like it's just not helpful for me, but I'm still moving and, and so it's being open to the change even within like you're still, it's about consistency versus like, it has to be this way.
I love what you said, like that kind of season, that phase, right? Because my kids are older now. They're 5 and 10. And so like what I could handle with having a baby and a 5-year-old is different than like now that my kids are older, right? Like that like where you are is a little bit about who you are and is a little bit about the season you're in. And then it's a little bit about circumstances around that kind of coming together. And it's okay for that to ebb and change and flow. And it's like saying this isn't for me right now doesn't mean that you're never going to get to a place where that might be something you want to prioritize again. And either whether it does or doesn't, like that's okay,
Yes, exactly. I love it. Well said.
So thinking about self-care, I know with the clients when I'm working with them, I'm like, okay, when we're talking about sleep, we also have to take care of you, right? Like, because that's a piece. And not waiting until babies or toddlers are sleeping perfectly to take care of you because, that you have to be able to show up and cope and parent them in the meantime. But I know it's a lot about time and it feels overwhelming. And where do you start? So thinking about simplifying that, what would you say? Like what should you be thinking about? Trying to think about, okay, how do I simplify bringing in some more nurturing habits or behaviors?
Yeah. That's so good because, I was like looking at creating something the other day about the 7 roadblocks that make it hard for health and self-care and for moms. And the first one is time. Just like our time is accounted for. You
need 1 million more hours in a day.
Right. Or you make the time and then like it's like you have to learn the skill of adaptability. You have to become very strong at it when you're a mom, just like, oh, okay, we're not doing that right now. But I think often it's just really realizing like, how can I make this as doable and as simple as possible so that even if it doesn't happen, even if I did block it out on my calendar, I can move it somewhere or I can still do it in some way. And so I usually talk to clients about the power of 10, like 10 minutes is powerful. It's crazy because you're like, it's, even when you're writing a book, like 10 minutes at a time, you're like, oh, that's not a lot, but you keep doing 10 minutes at a time and eventually you're going to write a book. Right. And it's like 10 minutes at a time, you're eventually going to be, get to your goal. So for 10 minutes of movement, for me, it was just doing these simple, small, kind of CrossFit-like workouts because that's what I love, that cross training in 10 minutes. And at first I was like, I'm barely sweating. This is not working. And then again, suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm strong enough to do push-ups, not for my knees again. Like, whoa, when did that happen? And it's not to say that you can't go longer than 10, but I just think it's like, just make it so simple that it's easy to do. And so, okay, so now maybe it's meal prepping or, budgeting, like, oh, my budget's all over. It's like, spend 10 minutes a day or 10 minutes once a week looking at it, right? Just what can you do in 10 minutes, either a day or a week, depending on your goal, that can help you move forward. And I mean, there's so many ideas we could talk about in different areas, but you talk obviously a lot about sleep and you have this, you were on my podcast talking about these beautiful things you can do for a sleep routine that doesn't take long. And actually you don't want it to take long. Like kids, like think about it, kids' sleep routine. If that bedtime routine is an hour, it's just gonna like, no one wants to do that bedtime routine. It's like, we're gonna, but I'm saying, no, don't get me wrong. There is room for that. But like, my daughter would drag it out for an hour and say, we're going to read stories for an hour. I'm like, no, we're not, baby girl. We're going to read it for shorter. Yeah. So, but it's more doable when it's to start, at least when it's a smaller amount. So like just thinking about I call it the power of 10, like what can you do in 10 minutes in those different areas that really like, or it's going to move you forward.
I love that. I talk a lot about like just those kind of micro moments, right? Where like you check in with your body, like what do you need? That just starting cultivating that practice of, I don't know, attunement with yourself, right? Like to even figure out what do you need. Like, I don't know about you personally or the moms you work with, but I know in myself, like when you got kids like demanding your attention every other second, like it's really easy to lose track of
Right.
you in that, right? And just be like, I've had to pee for the last like 2 hours. I
Yeah.
haven't gone
Yeah.
and pee, or I haven't eaten or had a drink, or I lost my coffee, God knows
Mhm.
when. And, you know, I think that's really, it's not the same as the power 10, but I think it's a lot in the same spirit, right? Those like
Yes.
small little steps, actions, check-ins, setting aside, prioritizing that you could do just to start
Hmm.
you in that like little baby steps, right? Like little
Right.
small steps to get things, I don't know,
Right.
create those habits, create those
Yeah.
patterns and routines.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think that what you're saying, it's being mindfulness, right? So even
Mm-hmm.
within that, you can still combine both. Like, so say if you're like, I want to move 10 minutes a day, it's being mindful, like, yeah, I was supposed to go for a run for that 10 minutes to do a mile, but I really think I just need a stretch. Like, that's actually what my
Mm-hmm.
body and my mind is needing. So it's almost having a toolkit or like options, like a buffet in front of you where you're like, I'm going to eat, so I'm going to move, but I'm going to choose today what that is because I'm attuned to myself. I'm listening, I'm being mindful.
Mm-hmm. I love that because, sometimes you got a terrible night's sleep and
Hmm.
whatever, if we're talking about physical activity, right? Maybe that
Right.
run or that yoga class or whatever it was, like, doesn't feel like the right fit and you need something to adjust. Or maybe you're like, actually, I really need to burn off some steam because, that's where my energy is at, and matching
Hmm.
that,
Right. Yeah.
that space of where you're at to what you're trying to do.
Hmm. Yeah. So good.
So thinking about, right, we kind of prioritize what's important to you and then chunking it out in small steps.
Hmm.
I feel like consistency is hard as a mom. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that resiliency of like getting derailed because, or almost like factoring in for getting derailed and
Yeah.
then recommitting, to
Hmm.
have that kind of imperfect consistency?
Yeah. I love that because you're right. You're going to get derailed. As great of a plan as you're going to make, life happens. And this is not just with being a mom and anything, but especially with kids, like things happen. Maybe you got to take them to whatever it may be. It's a lot of mindset of deciding that like it's affirming to yourself, I'm worth the time and investment to like do whatever, and whatever you want to craft to say that, like committing, just keep saying that to yourself, but also have accountability in some sense, right? So if there is something, like you said, you called your sister, on your run, you're like, I don't want to run in the afternoon. I don't like it, but I'm going to call her. Like, she's my form of accountability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that can mean anything. Accountability could mean a post in a mom group. It could mean a coach. It could mean a friend, a sister, relative. Like, and I think the thing about that accountability is also, you have to be humble. You have to have humility to have accountability. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes as moms, we're like, I'm fine. I can do everything. Nope. I don't, I'm good. I'm good. But it's like, no, no,
Yes.
no. You actually need support even more. So it's being humble enough to know, like, I've tried to be consistent with this. I've made it small, but I just can't do it on my own. So I'm going to get support. And knowing
Yeah.
that that's normal to be supported, especially I think as moms, whether you live close to family, whether you're single mom, I think motherhood just brings a whole level of like responsibility that I do not think we're meant to bear alone. We're not meant to bear it alone. And so if you don't have that support, create it. Like, whether that is,
Yes.
again,
Yes.
going get a mom fitness group or like a coach or whatever. I'm huge on support. Like, ask me an area of my life that matters to me. I could tell you who supports me there, because I just know that like I can't do it on my own, and I shouldn't be. None of us should. Right. So
And
I would
there's
say that
that feeling,
accountability.
right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
assume that we should be able to do it all. Like I feel like that is such a huge piece of like our, I don't know, societal narrative, right? On
Right.
like being a kind of have your stuff together parent is we
Mm-hmm.
should be able to kind of juggle it all. And it's like, oh
Right.
my gosh, no, we weren't supposed to do that. We weren't supposed to have a nuclear family without extended support. We were supposed to
Right.
have extended support, and that just looks different now. But it's so important.
It's so important. And it does take a village. It takes a village to raise a kid, but it takes a village to keep a mom in a good place. Again, I just think we all need people, and we become a mom and suddenly it's just like our life are our kids in some ways. That's just great. But it's like, that's all the more reason where it's like, I'm on a firm belief, the more kids I have, the more support I need.
I
I'm
love
like,
that.
I remember telling a friend, like, when I have 2 kids, I'm gonna somehow live with family, be close to family, or like convince family to come close. Because I just knew that it was going to add a whole other level, and so I'm in the process of convincing family to come close.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
So, and they want to, obviously, for different reasons, can't, but I just think that it's like normalize support. You just normalize it in your life, and that's what's going to help you stay consistent. It seems weird, like sometimes, of hiring a babysitter so you can have a couple hours on your own, but if that's what you need to do it. Like, it's worth it,
Mm-hmm. I love like what you're saying about accountability, though, like the different ways that we can help hold ourselves accountable and kind of create I don't know if self-discipline is the right word, but that like making sure that we're still centering those priorities for ourselves,
Right.
And like building that support system. And
Yeah.
that could be so many different things. It could be reminders on your phone. It could be,
Right.
like you said, a mom's group, like a Facebook group, or a mom's WhatsApp chat, or a mom's group, or like
Right.
a fitness class, or a personal trainer, or just your girlfriends checking in on each other. And like, there's so much power in that kind of
Right.
community, and just like, ooh, let's remind ourselves of our own priorities, because we don't have to hold it all in our brain all on our
Right.
own, because mom brain is a real thing. And
Yes.
you get to the day and you're like, oh wait, I was going to spend 10 minutes meal planning, and now it's 9 o'clock and I'm going to sleep because I'm tired. That kind of helping yourself out,
Yeah.
piece, I think, can be really powerful.
Yeah. I think, yeah, what you're saying is like, once you're clear on, I think whenever I do a live, I always end up saying these 3 things, but sometimes we need to hear it. Like, once you're clear on what you want, what you desire, right? Those areas you want to be nourished in, then you figure out how do I do it? Is it that's being mindful? Is it, an exercise class? Is it whatever? Then you ask yourself, what support do I need? That's always the last thing you need. That's always something you need. It's not just like, this is what I want, this is how I do it. It's like, no, what support do I need?
I
Because
love that.
we're just not meant to do it on our own. And it's actually so healing when someone says to you, no, I want to watch your kids for an hour so you can just have time for yourself. Like, every time someone has said that to me, I've cried. I'm just like, oh, thank you. But it's like, I would do it in a second for someone else. So why is it hard for me to receive?
Mm-hmm.
And so just knowing that, again, normalizing that support, whatever it may be, reminders, what you're saying, it can be free, it can be something you do on your own as a form of support, or it can be someone else is supporting you.
I love that, though. Like, what is it? How do I make
Right.
it happen? And how do I get the support
Yeah.
around that? Like, I love
Yeah.
that. It's kind of a simple, nice way to break it down and think about it. Like,
Right.
what are those priorities? How do I do it?
Mhm.
And where's my support going to come from?
Right.
I love
Exactly.
it. What
Yeah.
would you say if a mom is just like, how do I even figure out my priorities, right? Like, everything kind of feels chaotic, overwhelming, like,
Mhm.
how would you narrow that down? Like, I love what you're talking about earlier in the podcast episode about those 7 areas, but
Yeah.
how would someone think through that?
Yeah, I have this toolkit that you can use, which I'll link in here. But I've done this with many of the areas that I focus on throughout coaching. But like, like connect the dots, like a circle
Mm-hmm.
where you connect the, so it's a circle with all those 7 areas, right? And it's a visual way of like, okay, I'll just say how it is, but you don't have to use this to do it. But you can do a rating system as well. But you put the dot closer to the middle if you're dissatisfied or not nourished, and you put the dot further away. Ideally, you have a big circle
Mm-hmm.
on the outside, because you're like, oh well, I'm nourished everywhere, but that's not life. But when you start to connect it, it's easier to see, right? It's like, oh, I have 5 areas closer to the middle, that means I'm not as nourished, whatever. So I think a visual is like that, but also rating, right? So like 10
Mm-hmm.
being like, I feel really nourished, 1 being like, I need SOS help. Like, writing down those areas of your life, and just don't even think about it, don't judge yourself, don't, just write down a rating system of 1 to 10 of like, this is where I'm, and if you see like the higher numbers being like 8 or 9 in some areas, okay, I'm doing good. But if you see 1, 2, 3 in a lot of areas, it's like pick one of those areas and just start. And
Mm-hmm.
be mindful and intuitive, like what you're saying. Don't think I need to start in this area. Think it's like no, or I should say, but I need this.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's going to make me feel my best. Like for some women, honestly, it's not prioritizing their nutrition and exercise, even though I think that's super important. It's connecting with other moms, maybe.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, knowing you're not alone, knowing it's okay that your child has some sleep things that they're working out versus like you're hanging out with all these other moms and their children just sleep just effortlessly, because that could
Yes.
be isolating and you could feel like you're doing something wrong and then you go down this cycle versus like, no, my kid has had some things, so we've had to work on it, knowing like, you know what I mean? So I think it's like, where do you feel in your heart that you need support in what area versus what you should prioritize first is
I love
important.
that. I love that. The community piece is, I feel like it's important for all parents, but some more than others. And like for a lot of the families that I work with, they're the only one in their circle who isn't sleep training or has a
Right.
really wakeful, sensitive little one.
Mhm.
And so when they're in a space where other parents are struggling with some of the same things, it's like the first time that they're really like, oh my God, I don't have to,
Right.
I don't know, put on this facade, or there's actually people here who can relate. And that there's so much power in that,
Right.
that sense of community. I feel like we're so fractured as new parents, just for so many different reasons, that probably every parent needs that, but definitely some, more than others need that as a priority.
Yeah. And I think it's important what you're saying. It's like not isolating yourself, but not isolating other people. Like if their kids do sleep well, like it's like still be friends with them. But maybe you say like, hey, this is a very sensitive point for me. So let's just not talk about whatever.
Yes, yes.
But like, and if it's a healthy friendship, being like, totally get it, totally get it. Like, we're just not going to talk about that, right? Because
I say that all the
there,
time.
yes, there is certain topics as moms, like, listen, I'm just not healthy or like strong enough to like hear what you're saying and not make myself feel bad. So like, let's just, for a while, let's just not talk about. And so I think you're right. Like we just live in such a fractured society, especially around parenting and mothering, that we really need each other. We need to learn from each other. We need to support each other. It's not about whose kid is the best or whose house is the cleanest. It's like, how can we
Definitely
just
not
support?
mine.
Definitely not mine either. So how can we just support each other on this beautiful but hard journey? It's a hard journey, but it's beautiful at the same
That.
time. It's like labor. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's so beautiful. I remember with my last kid, I like holding him literally as I pushed him out. I was like, I want to do it again because it was the most beautiful experience, but the hardest experience at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So we need support in that. And yeah, so I just think it's asking ourselves, what support do we need in those areas as well?
I love that. I absolutely love that. So, as we kind of wrap things up for today, is there anything about simplifying self care that you feel like we haven't talked about that you want to leave folks thinking about?
Yeah, I think going back to what we're talking about, there is so many amazing resources out there. There's so many amazing
Mm-hmm.
podcasts, there's so many amazing books. And I just think be careful of just feeling like you need to consume them all or do this method, do this thing, because
Yes.
you're gonna like, I think I've seen it. I've seen how much I've struggled with it as a mom. Like if I do baby wise, if I do whatever, my kids will, and I just get stuck in a place where I lose in touch with what I actually need. I know what I need. I know what I need when I'm really listening in. And so use these resources well. And even I wouldn't say to you, use the resources that I share or you share about well, but don't if it's going to make overwhelm you to like being paralyzed, that you're not doing anything, or it's going to like make you feel bad, like stop it and just check in with yourself again. uh,
Yes.
I think our bodies and our minds and our hearts are actually always trying to communicate to us what we need, but because of having busy lives, kids, we're just silenced it. And so if you don't know what you need, if you don't even know where to start, just be consistent with taking 10 minutes of self-reflection. Just mindful, where are you at? What's going on? What do you need? Some people that's journaling, some people that's sitting outside in a beautiful day with a cup of coffee or tea, I think if we start to pay attention, we're going to start seeing a little bit more of what we need and giving ourselves permission to pursue that.
Yeah, that awareness, right? It's so
Right.
important, that awareness and attunement.
Yeah.
I love that. All right, Bree, tell folks where they can find you, and I will put that stuff in the show notes, of course.
Yeah, I created a special community for moms. Now that's really what I'm focusing on, called the Mommy Me Time community on Facebook. That's where you can join us on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, Brianna.k.Wilkerson. And yeah, I would say those are places on social that you can connect with me most. I'm in the process of moving my website, so by this time I'll drop that link below. But yeah, and then I have a podcast as well, Tea Time with Bree, that Kim is on. So go listen to her episode.
Yes, it was so much fun. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I had loved talking about simplifying self-care with you.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.